countries, different time zones. We thank you for joining with us today. And we from Town, and Teresa and I are glad to invite all the panelists. So in no particular order, I want to welcome Nick Davis from Jamaica, 11 Cacao, Reyna Flores from Mexico, from Síij Chocolates, Ancestral Chocolate, and then Kimberly Addison from Ghana, from 57 Chocolate, and Arun Viswanathan from India with Chitra'm Chocolates. So we thank you all for donating your time and efforts to be on this panel, and we thank all the participants for tuning in, because without you, this webinar won't be successful. So all their bios are in our website, so I'm not going to tell too much about them. All we want to tell them is they have a lot of experience, they have got a lot of awards. That speaks for their dedication and the quality and how much effort they put into it. So they are here to share their some views on the process and recipe and equipment today. Welcome you all. And Ms. Teresa is going to be moderating today's panel. And then all of you, if you have any questions, please put it on the chat only. And then since we have so many panelists and we want to respect the time, so we want to make sure, we will be asking, Teresa will be asking all the questions and we will get answers from the panelists, and all the participants' questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. So don't worry, we will try to answer as many as possible. Even if we don't have time, we will try to get you the answer for your questions from the panelists, and we will try to send it as an email or as a blog post. Your questions will be answered. So we thank you for your cooperation. And with this, Teresa, take over.
All right. Well, thank you, Mrs. Balu, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And we will we have a lot of questions to answer, so I think we'll jump right in. What we're talking about today is the effect of process, recipe, and equipment on each other. And our first question that we have is, what effect does the atmosphere play in the process, recipe, and equipment? For example, how do you compensate for high humidity in your working space, cool or cold temperatures, or any other special situations that you face in relationship to the atmosphere that you're working in? And I would like to ask Nick, would you respond to that question first for us?
Hi everybody, first and foremost. Yeah, I mean, where we are here in Jamaica, we're running at about just over 100 degrees RH. Incredibly difficult, as you can imagine. When we put it into the production atmosphere, it gets very hot and very humid very quickly. So what we do, we actually use a wonderful there's a wonderful air conditioner which we use by Panasonic, and that Panasonic air conditioning unit actually is fantastic at actually running as a humidifier at the same time. So we can switch between humidifying and also air conditioning. We want the air conditioning for when we're tempering. We want the humidifier for when we're actually storing our beans for the rest of the time. We find that because of the high output of water, running a humidifier all the time is just literally physically time consuming. You've got to run, cables, and I've found that sometimes when you run the piping, you can have issues with bursts. The last thing you want is water spilling all over where you're keeping your beans. So that's one of the things which we do to try and remove the humidity, to bring it down to a workable amount. So we're running it around about 55 RH most of the time, relative humidity. But yeah, because we're next to the seaside, I feel quite honored to have a chocolate factory by the Caribbean Sea. It's a great view, but definitely not the most ideal circumstances in order to make chocolate. The other issue which we have is because of the fact that we're by the water, salt. We're constantly having to clean equipment every day. because you will get a buildup of moisture, salty air building up within the space, no matter what you do. So it means that we're constantly dealing with making sure that we're on top of our cleaning. You have to do that anyway, but what I'm saying is every surface almost has to be wiped down. The quality of the stainless steel which we're using is obviously of a higher grade within the food space, but even so, it's just a real nightmare to deal with constantly. If I could do things differently, maybe I would do, but you know, these are cards which you're dealt with when you're producing in a producing country.
Thank you for that, Nick. I have just to expand on that question a little bit. How does that play into the grinding process? The temperature, the humidity, does that have an effect when you're grinding the chocolate?
I mean, one of the things which I have noticed, it's not necessarily in the grinding, it's in the storage afterwards where I find a problem because we have such high humidity. It means that I am aware sometimes that our chocolate, when we're aging it, can age in a different way. And I think that that's due to the water content which is in the air where we are. So where we actually store the chocolate separately, as opposed to where we store the beans, I actually run a couple of humidifiers, standalone humidifiers. During the grinding process, I don't find any difference in terms of the time it takes. And one of the benefits we have being in the tropics is, you know, I love when I see people, makers in more temperate zones where they're having to use, you know, heat guns or whatever to get their beans up to working temperature. And like in Jamaica, you just pour your nibs in and away you go because we're already warm, you know, so we get a lot of speed at the beginning. But for me, it's the problem of aging. How do we age the chocolate without there being some sort of hygroscopic activity happening during that phase? You know, that's the problem which I am constantly trying to deal with.
Thank you, Nick. Kimberly, could you speak to that, the question that we're discussing about the atmosphere and how it plays in your recipe process or equipment?
Absolutely. So one of the main things is it's absolutely challenging making chocolate in a chocolate zone. As you guys know, we're not. And so very much like Nick said, is we also have to use dehumidifiers and also have to have ACs running. And one thing that's key is definitely the dehumidifier because chocolate obviously is not good with water. And if you're making chocolate in a humid atmosphere, that is one of the potential risks. So we have to make sure that we station our humidifiers in the locations so that we're not using chocolate that has high water content. And I would also say what's also key is structure and structuring your production center. It's always good to start in one room. However, as gradually expanded, we can utilize there was a specific need. So, for example, in our dining room, we actually have a dehumidifier because we've seen that when there's high humidity in our dining room, our chocolate can begin to absorb a lot of moisture. And so that's why we have, for example, in our room, we don't necessarily need a dehumidifier or AC. But for example, in our molding room, we also use ACs, and in our packing room, so we sort of structure it based upon the need.
Thank you, Kimberly, for that answer. I wonder if we're having a little bit of technical issue, but I think what I hear you saying is that you face a similar issue as what Nick was describing in terms of keeping the humidity down and thinking about how you structure your setup and how you're working and where you're working. Yeah. Okay. Arun, could you speak to that for us? Talk about, you know, the effect of the atmosphere.
Hi. So the major issue which I face is more to do with the temperature. So where we are is a little. I mean, it's not very hot here, but sometimes the weather changes. See, right now, when the meeting began, it was normal, and it's been 20 minutes and it's raining here. So there's a constant fluctuation in in the temperature, which is a problem. So when I discussed about these questions with my team, we also came to realize that the problem they often face is sometimes they switch off the grinder at melanger at some phase, and the sudden shift in the temperature causes it to uh, you know uh, the freeze. I mean, to clump. I mean, so it's like that's something which we face often. We have not invested in a dehumidifier so far, but the temperature is something. But with regards to storage, as Nick said, I would accept that storage is majorly the major issue which we actually face, because post grinding isn't a major problem, but post grinding storage, because we age our chocolates too, and that's when the temperature plays a major role. The air conditioner is the major help here, and we have one storage room which is always air conditioned, and that's how we maintain our the making facilities.
Thank you, Arun. Reyna, could you speak to us a little bit about the atmosphere and how it plays in what you do there in Mexico? Reyna, will you unmute your microphone?
Thank you. Hi. Well, I mostly live in Comalcalco. Here is a very humid place and very hot. So regarding to atmosphere, I haven't noticed any negative effect in the process of recipe, but in the efficient working of the equipment, for sure, I can tell you my ECGC 12 works better in Mexico City than in Comalcalco. What's the difference? Okay, here in Comalcalco, we are sea level. In Mexico City, we are 2,400 meters sea level. So it feels to me, it seems to me that my melanger works better in Mexico City. Even the sound is softer and lower. So I was thinking maybe here in Comalcalco, we have more pressure, atmosphere pressure, and that affects the working of the. And regarding to humidity, well, it's a nightmare, the humidity here in Comalcalco. It is a must-have air conditioner where you can regulate humidity and temperature. That conditioner, it must be like 22, from 18 to 22 grades, talking about centigrades. And that's it. That's how I manage the making of chocolate with so much humidity. 2 nights ago, I tried to temper. It's been raining for almost 3 weeks. And in that evening, my air conditioner got broken. So I failed tempering my chocolate. 5 kilos, nothing to do with my chocolate. So we have to try to find out how to control temperature to have succeed. That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Reyna. Nick, did you have something you would like to add?
Yeah, one thing I was going to say that I've found is that using seeding techniques for tempering in the tropics seems to work much better for me. You know, this is no disrespect to all of the very expensive companies out there who make tempering machines, but I find seeding significantly easier as a technique in the tropics, as a way of almost guaranteeing that I get good results than by using the more expensive machines. And, you know, as long as I have like a seed incubator, you know, I've always got something on hand. If I'm in Kingston, I'm in a similar situation to Reyna, where I've got 2 operations. If I'm by the sea, on the north coast, it's never going to happen. You know, it's too hot, it's too humid. But in the mountains overlooking Kingston, where we do have high humidity, but we do have cooler temperatures, it's possible, even during the height of summer, if I work late into the evening, you know, when the temperature drops, I'll be able to temper as long as I'm using seed.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, so next we would like to talk about what different types of sweeteners everyone is using, and what effects do those sweeteners have on the equipment, and then how you manage that and how you adjust your process and recipe. Arun, would you like to start with that question for us?
Yeah. So so the whole idea of our, you know, the chocolate making, you guys hear me? Yeah. So the whole idea of my chocolate making began with alternate sugars. So most of our chocolates, what we make is with palm sugar, coconut sugar, and then we later introduced the jaggery. So which is unrefined cane sugar obtained from the juice. So so we source from different vendors, like different farmers provide us with different people provide us with this jaggery. The problem which we face constantly with jaggery is like there is a lot of, some of them dry it well, some of them don't, and it causes a lot of moisture. I mean, the moisture is pretty high, and due to which we experience a lot of clumping in jaggery based chocolate. We have not experienced anything, you know, not, I mean, anything difficult with palm sugar or coconut sugar, but jaggery is something which we, so what we do is we have like the most efficient in our way of looking into some machinery to be more efficient. We use that melanger, and then we also are I mean, we are made to sometimes add more of cocoa butter to make the jaggery chocolate better consistent and avoid the clumping. So that's how we have rectified it so far.
Thank you, Arun. Kimberly, do you want to speak to what type of sweeteners that you use, and then any effect that has on your process, your equipment, and then do you adjust your recipe based on any issues that come up when you're using the different sweeteners that you use in your recipe?
Yes, so we primarily use cane sugar. I hope you guys can hear me all right now. The network has been a little choppy. So we primarily use cane sugar. And so I would say when it comes to using sweeteners, you have to consider the type of taste you want. So when it comes to cane sugar, I find that it especially if you're comparing it to something like a sugar-free chocolate like xylitol. Xylitol has a very distinct taste. And so it's about, I would say for us, it's about knowing your customer and your clientele and what kind of taste they're looking for. So when it comes to making a sugar-free chocolate, because that's something we're currently working on and experimenting with based upon our clientele, I would say that you can't just say that, okay, so I make a great 73% dark chocolate with cane sugar and that comes out right, so I can just automatically substitute the same for xylitol. It doesn't work that way because different sweeteners have different effects. And so adding the same quantity of xylitol might not get you that same taste that you're looking for. And making sugar-free is great, but you also have to know just because a chocolate is sugar-free doesn't mean that it will still have the same taste that people love. So it's a matter of experimenting and making sure that not only is your chocolate sugar-free, but it also has a good taste, because people still want, though it's a sugar-free chocolate and they want maybe a healthier option, they still want a good taste.
Thank you, Kimberly. Yeah, we could hear you. We could hear you very well. I appreciate your answer. Nick, do you want to talk about what type of sweeteners you're using there in your recipes in Jamaica, and what you've learned about the effects that they can have, and your experience with that?
Yeah, I definitely want to ask Arun a question later on about the jaggery, because that's got my brain going crazy. Jamaica, people of African descent came to this island because of sugar, because it was so expensive. It helped fund the development of the empire, of the British Empire. So yeah, we've got a long history with cane sugar. That's what we use. You know, talking to Kimberly's experience, I don't believe, I think in Ghana, you have to import sugar in. Part of the ethos of my business is that we're going to use local products, you know, so we're not using anything other than the locally available sugar. We have so many different varietals, so many different genetic sugars which have been developed in the island over many, many centuries. What we are doing is we're using sugar which comes from the rum estates, because we're finding that we have so many different rum factories. The sugars give a different flavor, in the same way that we always think of the terroir of sugar playing an effect in the genetics of terroir and environment and genetics playing a role within cacao. It's the same thing with the sugar. And so we're finding that sugar from one estate, which may use more rum sugar, and use sugar specifically for rum, has a very different flavor in the chocolate. And we'll find that factories which produce sugar specifically for the, you know, coffee or, you know, normal refined sugar, cane sugar, will be very different too. And you literally line them up and you can see the different colors, the different thicknesses. So we're playing around a lot with what the sugars will taste like. One of the things that I found is I really like using molasses sugar, baker's sugar. The higher molasses content seems to have a wonderful effect on the final flavor of the chocolate. Like what Arun says, I do find that you have a tendency toward more clumping. Like Arun, I add a little bit more cocoa butter to it to get it moving, to get it more fluid. One thing I have found is grinding sugars. When you grind sugars, it has a very different impact, I've found, not only in the flavor. It almost gives a caramelized flavor to your chocolate, but it also has an impact also on the particle distribution of the final chocolate itself. So these are two things which I've started playing around with, but it's a wormhole, you know, it's a rabbit hole of complexity, and where it takes you, nobody knows. And to be truthful, I don't know if anybody else has found this, sometimes we don't have time to experiment. Sometimes you just have to make chocolate. I would love to be able to sit there saying, I'm experimenting week in, week out. I'm trying to make a living, okay? And when I get the time to be able to experiment, I will do. But until then, I know what works. I continue with what works. I make some money, and then I move on when I have a little bit of breathing space.
Thank you. I have one question in that regard. There must have been some amount of time in the beginning where I was recently talking to Jose Maldonado, who was going to be with us but wasn't able to make it today, and he was talking about making many batches at first and having to, you know, kind of put them in the bin because things didn't go well when he was experimenting. I know you said you sometimes don't have time to experiment, but there is some period of time where you had to kind of figure out what works.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, absolutely.
A little bit about that.
Yeah, sorry, in the beginning, absolutely, Teresa. I mean, you have to, because you don't know, you know nothing. You know, you're coming into this fresh like a baby. But very quickly, the best advice that someone gave me is to try other people's chocolate, because try other people's chocolate, which is good. You know, what is good is you can't always measure it by awards, but, you know, it starts to give you an idea of what you like. And I think knowing what you like is key. So you find the chocolates which you like, and then I try and replicate towards that. You know, even if it's by reading on the internet what they have done, or going onto their website to get an idea of what their process is. And then I match that with what I have and what equipment I have. And it's almost like reverse engineering to get to the point where you are getting a chocolate which you want to make. But right now, in the situation which we're all dealing with, I have one priority, that is having guaranteed beans, having guaranteed markets to sell those finished chocolates to. That's all I care about right now. I'm literally all about the money. It's not a hobby. This is literally survival for me.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick. Reyna, would you share with us your experience with sweeteners, maybe what sweeteners that you use, and then anything that you faced or learned in your experience? Reyna, you want to unmute when it's, yeah.
Thank you. Talking about sweeteners, I've been trying some of them. First of all, I need to tell you that I believe cane sugar, the white one, is a dead sweetener, but it's neutral. So it lets the cocoa beans to express themselves. That's the only good thing I find about cane sugar, the white one, okay? Then I've been trying with coconut sugar. I've been trying with molasses. Here in my area, there are sugar mills, so I can get molasses in the very first stages. Not only brown sugar, but molasses. So I use molasses very dry. I also like to use the coconut sugar, and of course, powdered honey. I really love powdered honey with chocolate, but it keeps its flavor even when it's dry. So it's very important. I would like to emphasize that when using honey, it must be less amount for the same sweetening effect and taste as with the other sugars. Its power to sweetener, it's bigger. So some sugars, the ones I use, sometimes come with humidity. So it's important to pay attention because this fact avoid to use them because it's going to ruin your batch. And it's important, of course, to pay attention or to keep in mind, the more sugar you use in your batch, you need to use cocoa butter to increase the liquor fluidity. So if you are using 50 and 50 cocoa beans and 50 sugar, cane sugar, let's say, you're going to have a very thick liquor. So you need to adjust the fluidity with cocoa butter. So I think from 70% higher, you don't need cocoa butter. But it also depends of what kind of beans you are using. Some of them, like the criollos in Mexico, they have a lot of butter, but some don't. So you need to use cocoa butter to get fluidity. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Reyna. I have just one more question as it pertains to sweeteners. What's your experience with the, and anyone who would like to answer, I'm open to that, with icing sugar?
No.
I was talking to Jose and he was saying to avoid icing sugar,
Yes.
or powdered sugar.
Avoid icing sugar because it contains something from the corn. I don't remember the name, I don't know the name, but it's not only sugar. You can make icing sugar with a processor, but if you get it from the supermarket, it's not only sugar, it contains a powder of the corn. So it's going to change the flavor. I don't know, it's going to make chemistry with the cocoa beans and the butter. So avoid to use icing sugar, but yes, you can make icing sugar.
Anyone else want to speak to that? Arun?
So I've not used icing sugar before, and majorly because it like Reyna mentioned, the corn flour in it is what we usually get in the market. And also to add to the question before we wind up this, so with coming back to the palm sugar and jaggery also, I would also say like the palm sugar which we initially made, we sourced it from a farmer, and it had a barbecue flavor which was not very nice to taste when it was tasted as sugar. But the minute it was with the chocolate, when you had tasted it with the chocolate, it actually gave a very pleasant taste, and it was like during our tasting sessions, it was very well liked, and a lot of people really still buy that for that factor. So some of these sugars actually bring in another tasting profile to your already existing beans and the chocolate. So was something which I wanted to add along. And the jaggery, for that fact, we have never been able to grind it perfectly or fine so far, but it's one of those rough ground chocolates which actually has a client who really enjoy it. And the after aging, the palm sugar and jaggery, at the same time, the jaggery actually tastes more of jaggery, while the palm sugar and the coconut sugar taste more of the chocolate. So this was also something which we noticed, and we have had some reviews regarding the same. So the entire industry with the alternate sugar is something which we are exploring in that way. So these are some things which I've experienced last year.
Thank you, Arun. All right, so if there aren't any last points about sugars and the process and equipment, we'll move on to talking about the different emulsifiers and the role that those emulsifiers play in your process, and the effect that they might have on the process and the equipment. For example, soy lecithin versus any other lecithin. Kimberly, can you share your experience? Do you use emulsifiers? And if so, what effect does that have on your process and the equipment?
I actually don't use emulsifiers in our chocolate, though a lot of chocolate makers do use emulsifiers. So emulsifiers are essentially useful in making the chocolate less viscous, making it easier to work with and easier to mold. One piece of advice that I got when I started making chocolate was it's key, if you're adding cocoa butter, to add it at the last minute possible. That will help it be more fluid and more workable. And so over time, also equally going back to the dehumidifier in the grinding room, that has helped immensely in not having to use emulsifiers. So I'm in a tropical climate. I'm in Ghana. It's very hot. It's very humid here, but I have never found the need to use emulsifiers in our chocolate.
Thank you. Reyna, would you like to speak to emulsifiers and your experience?
Yes, thank you. Most of the time, I don't use them. Only when I have after formula with milk. One of the functions of lecithin is it's like a hand holder between fats, the fats from the milk and the fats from the cocoa beans. Okay, so we know lecithin extends the shelf life of your products and makes the chocolate liquor more fluid. So it's easier to mold and everything. But I prefer to avoid it, and only when I use when I make milk chocolate, I use 1% and liquid, no powder lecithin, but liquid. That's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Reyna. I love that idea that the emulsifier is the hand holder between the fat and the chocolate. Nick,
Yes.
you want to share your experience with emulsifiers? And
I'm pretty much on the same page as Kimberly on this. I have worked with chocolates here with beans which are really low in cocoa butter. Almost like what Reyna was saying about some of the criollos which she has worked with in Mexico. And that is challenging. And you literally feel, you know, if granite stones could scream, they would be, because you can hear the engine in the grinder. Really, it's really painful. But you know you'll get through it. You know, and that is a testimony to the design skills of Cocoa Town, which is a brand which I use. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult. But what I tend to do is I go for the more expensive option, which is adding cocoa butter. You know, we're in an island where there's cocoa butter, so we use cocoa butter. I was pressing it myself, but that was an economical. Unfortunately, cocoa butter presses. Again, this is a big shout out to Cocoa Town. If you can make an affordable cocoa press, I'd be very happy. But you know, that's one of the ways to be able to get around it, is using more cocoa butter. I prefer to keep it cocoa based. I'm a person who has very severe allergies, and one of the things which I'm allergic to is soy, and so therefore I try and keep everything local, and I try and keep everything as natural as possible. And so even with my milk chocolates, I only use coconut milk in my chocolate, but what I tend to do is I find that it works smoother, and I get that the right consistency and the right level of viscosity by adding cocoa butter to it. So that for me is my way of treating my machines good. I give them a little bit of extra love by adding cocoa butter to it. But yeah, that's my take. I mean, I have experimented, I have to be truthful, with it in the past, and it was amazing, Reyna, that when you add the lecithin to it and watch how it changes literally in front of your eyes at that last minute. You know, your chocolate has been struggling for such a long time, you add a little bit of lecithin to it, and literally you have flowing, wonderful, free-flowing chocolate. It's great, and it definitely aids with the molding up. But again, it's an expensive import for us, so I prefer to spend a little bit on the butter and keep it local than to add the lecithin from my point of view.
thank you for that. Thanks everybody for your answers on that. I will tell you, Nick, that I know the cocoa butter press is something Mr. Balu is working on. So hopefully that'll be sometime in our future.
Remember, I said cheap.
Yes. Affordable, let's say.
Affordable, sorry, yes, affordable.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll leave emulsifiers and move on to talking about the different types of milk or milk substitutes, and you know, sort of how that affects your process when you add it. What effect does it have on the machine? And then, you know, sort of what modifications do you make? We know there's, you know, cow's milk, and then there are like goat milk, camel milk, and then there are, you know, the milk. I guess if it's coconut or rice or nut, they're not really milks, but but we call them milks. So then, you know, how did those things work for you and your process? Kimberly, would you like to start us off on talking about, you know, when you're making milk chocolate?
Yeah, so milk chocolate is definitely probably more challenging to make in a tropical climate than dark chocolate. And one thing I would want to advise people is if you're making chocolate in a tropical climate and you're dealing with milk powder, one of the main challenges is, at least for us, we've seen, is making sure that the storage is proper. Because oftentimes where we purchase our milk powder, it's stored in a very warm condition, and sometimes it can kind of change the flavor. So you want to make sure that you're storing, when you purchase your milk powder, that you're storing it properly in a cool environment where it's not, once again, too humid as well. And I would say that once again, depending on the taste you're looking for, that's going to determine the type of milk powder you're going to use. So I've worked with cow's milk powder and coconut milk powder. Coconut milk powder has a very distinct taste. So if you don't like coconut, then don't use coconut milk powder. It's going to have a very potent coconut milk flavor. And that's not a bad thing. People like it. Some people don't like it. And again, when you're dealing with, I would say, just regular milk powder, just knowing the right time at which to add it in, that can determine whether you're getting a more sort of like caramel or malty flavor as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Arun, you want to talk to us about the different milks and how they affect your process, or what effect do they have on the equipment? What have you learned, and any adjustments that you made based on your recipe?
Yes. With the milk powders, I think we initially started with the regular milk powders, and then we began the the coconut milk powder with the demand in the with the the people who don't want to take the dairy anymore. So the coconut milk powder is something which we use, and we have realized that coconut milk powder is actually easier to grind than the regular milk powder. So that's something which we have kept in mind when we do. We are now giving more options with the coconut milk powder, and it's probably the the better selling collection from our end. And there's not much adjustments to make, but except for one of our products where we have used a millet in it, like the ragi, which is one of our native millets which we have used. And that as that along with the coconut milk powder has been one of the most difficult chocolates for us to finish. And we also have noticed some issues previously when we have had a coconut milk powder with an alternate sugar not blending well also. So those are some things which we have noticed, and we are still trying to work out something on that right now.
Thank you. Reyna, would you like to speak about milks and your experience with that?
Okay. Yes, thank you. Well, we must know that as the sugars, any kind of milk, cow's milk or goat's milk or vegetable milks, are going to thicken the cocoa liquor. So you need to compensate the fluidity with cocoa butter in order to let your machinery, your melangers work softer, work easy. So the more fat on the power milk, the less cocoa butter you are going to need. So I love goat's milk because I don't have my melanger works better. The goat's milk dissolves dissolves easier to the liquor I'm working with. But in Mexico, we have this cow's milk with different with more ingredients, not only cold milk. So it makes a trouble to work with it. So I'm trying to get the milk from outside Mexico, and it's better. When I use Mexican powdered goat's milk, it makes like grains. So I really don't like that. I need to work my melanger several hours more. But it's different with the powered milks made outside Mexico. So goat's milk, it's my favorite, and people likes the chocolate with goat's milk. Yeah, and remember to use lecithin when using milks. Well, that's what book says and everything like that. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Reyna. Nick, you want to talk about milks and?
Yeah. So, I mean, my experience has been limited. I have to echo what Reyna said in regards to getting the same level of quality of milks in Jamaica. You know, we have huge import bills into these countries, and I technically don't want to be part of that same import bill. But there is a difference in quality. So, like Reyna, I import in a goat's milk from a US company, and it's fantastic. And I use that every once in a while. But as I said, I try to do that very rarely. So that's literally almost for one client that I'll do that for. But most of the things which I do, again, because I have allergies, I'm very aware that I don't want to, I'm trying to reduce the allergens within my workflow. And so we've done a lot of things with butters, so with milks, so like white chocolates with oat milk. And so we basically powder out normal oat flake and then add that into our white chocolate. You do get a very oaty taste to it, and it's not to everybody's liking. I think Kimberly said that previously. You know, certain things are not to everybody's taste. Coconut milk is not to everybody's taste, right? And it's the same with oat milks. But you know, the vegan part of the market is huge. You know, it can't be ignored. And because I don't necessarily love that particular type of chocolate, when you add oat milks to some of our local ingredients like sorrel or ginger, you know, it takes it to another level. And it's a different taste, which people here have never experienced before. You know, and people actually outside have never experienced before. But so that's my experience. I try and stick to the darks primarily, but you know, you have to also be aware that the market is looking at other things, you know, and they pay the bills.
Thank you for that, Nick. I just have one question in regards to the milks, milk powders. Do you adjust when you're adding the powder? I mean, it's not something that you're trying to grind. I think Kimberly spoke about that a little bit. Do you add it at the end? You use the Cocotown has the choco kneader that just sort of blends it, or do you add that in your process and actually are grinding the milk powder?
I add it into the process and I'm grinding it. I'm grinding it with the nibs and the sugar as well. But like Reyna said, also making sure to add in, because when you add in your milk powder, the chocolate is going to thicken drastically. So you're going to have to make sure that you're also adding in your cocoa butter as well at that point in time.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak to that when you're adding your milk powder? No.
Using Mexican cow's milk, I need to run the melanger like 18 more hours when using different milks from outside Mexico. So it's very hard to make milk chocolate with the ones I have here. Thank you.
Thank you, Reyna. Okay, so we want to find out about, let's see, how do you differentiate when you're making your chocolate? What is a process related issue, a recipe related issue, or a machine related issue? So when you face a problem, how are you diagnosing where that problem is arising from? And then, what adjustments might you make? Nick, would you like to take that question first?
Well, I'm like a typical customer, which is blame the equipment first. It's nothing that I've possibly done, because, how on earth could I be responsible for a mistake? No, let's be truthful. That's what most people do, right? Most people blame the equipment. The equipment isn't working properly. What you need to do is you need to break down what everything should be doing, and then work out what you're not doing, or just read the instructions. There's often a failure to read the instructions to be able to understand what the processes are doing. But yeah, I mean, sometimes there are flaws in the process of the way the equipment has been done. It works for most people, but what you're trying to do, it's not quite going to do. Sometimes you have to accept that that's just the way it is. But I think you should try and, I'm a big fan of trying stuff, and if it doesn't work, trying to work out what doesn't work and then trying it again, because it doesn't work once doesn't mean it's not going to work again. For a long time, prime example, this is a different thing, but for a long time people were saying that you couldn't add liquid into the refining process, and I saw on Instagram someone literally adding a bottle of whiskey or some other liquid into the melanger, and I was like, that's craziness, that can't possibly work. And then I saw someone else do it, and then I thought, you know what, I'm going to try it myself. And I tried it and it didn't work, but I changed the way that they did it and it worked. And I had a rum chocolate, something which I've been trying to do for an incredibly long time. So sometimes it's a mixture of the two things. There are certain processes which we know cannot work, but give it a go. Because the rules have been set in place, who are the people who create the rules? Try and break the rules, just don't break your equipment, because it's expensive. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, Kimberly, what is your experience?
One thing I would say is use your 5 senses: sight, taste, smell, touch, and hearing. If you've ever taken driving lessons, one of the first things they'll tell you is know the sound of your engine, know the sound of your machines. That's actually been a game changer for us. Like now if anybody walks in and the machine isn't sounding a certain way, we know that something is off. So it's very important to use your 5 senses when making chocolate and when developing your process. Know your process, document everything. That's a very key thing, because you could do something amazing the first time and then you're trying to replicate it a second time and you didn't write anything down, and then you're stuck. So document everything, document your successes and document your failures, because that helps you to improve and it helps you to keep creating things. And then also just know your products and make sure your staff know your products, so that you would know when something is tasting off or isn't quite right. So I would say definitely the key is using your 5 senses. That's very key.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Arun, what's your input?
So first we'll have to describe what is failure in bean to bar chocolates. Like we see there can never go wrong with chocolates. We still make something out of it. So with regards to the millet in the chocolate, for instance, out of my experience, we still have not been able to get a smooth texture out of it. And people like it for how it is. And but when it came to the first episode of issue which we faced was something which we have previously discussed. When I did a milk chocolate in one melanger, and it had, like, caramel particles, like, particles of caramelized sugar in it. And it felt burnt. And that was the first instance. And and over time we have, like, realized that it's just not the machinery alone which can be the problem. It's a series of steps and things which you take. Like, there might be a certain ingredient which you should have added at the end. Sometimes sugar and milk addition together, like what Nick usually says, is like could be the reason. The stone placement of the stone after cleaning has been a problem before. I have one of my someone in my team actually once while cleaning broke I mean he took the stone to the basin, and we broke the basin. So there are instances where we faced, like, sometimes people drop something. There's so many factors come, and then when you put it back into the machine, there can be a small alteration to how it actually works. Even with regards to, and it's also a lot to do with how you psychologically view a mistake to be. So I personally feel a lot of times it's to do with a recipe and the ingredient first, because some of the ingredients react very differently when you source from different sources. And I think there's nothing called a failure as long as something is edible out of the process.
And I'm going to echo what Arun said. I think if we're absolutely truthful, if everybody who is on the panel or who's an attendee were to write down the experiences they've had with making chocolate, the mistakes, you come back to a machine and, like, chocolate is sprayed all over the wall. I mean, like, you could write a book on all of our experiences of what not to do with chocolate. Everybody is going to have these horrible moments, and you're like, why did that happen? Or, why did I tighten that too much, or what? But it's part of that learning process, and it's something you won't repeat again, as long as you say, Kimberly, you pass it down to everybody involved in the chain. But not all of us have people. There's not all of us can blame anybody else. It's like me and my wife, and most of the time it's me who's making that mistake, and I'm the one who's beating myself up. But it's part of the process, as Arun said. We're learning every day. We'll repeat the same mistakes probably at some stage, but it's just part of this journey. Chocolate making is not straightforward at all.
And to add to that, even the caramel crystal chocolates, I had actually given it, that was the first ever milk chocolate which I did, and I had actually given it for tasting to a lot of my clients, and they loved it, except for the fact I don't know how to replicate it.
Write it down, says Kimberly.
Yeah, but it was like, once it was an error, and I don't want to sell an error out, but sometimes the best inventions are when you make an error, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah, so I guess I think it's a decision which every chocolate maker takes when he sells a product. Even after a small error can actually turn out to be a big profit.
Yeah, in art we call that a happy accident. Yeah,
definitely.
Reyna, will you share your experience with us?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to tell everybody who is knowing about the use of the machinery is to pay attention on the enough pressure, the thing that pressures the stones. At the very beginning of your batch, it must be very completely loosened, and always pre-grind your nibs. When I was starting making chocolate, one day I forgot to pre-grind the nibs. So I put them into the melanger, and a few minutes later, the arm opened and stopped the machine. So, oh my God, what have I made with this? What happened? So I remember you need to grinder your nibs. So from then, I started to pre-grind every time, okay, and then loose the knob, not to put the pressure. The stones are heavy, and the stones by themselves are going to press the pre-grinded nibs. Once you got a certain grinder, you can go pushing, pressing the knob, okay? That's very important. And when there is a poorly balanced formulation, it's going to affect the performance of your melanger. Let's say if you have a lot of sugar, as I said before, you need to put cocoa butter. If not, your melanger, your stones are going to suffer a lot. So first of all, write on your formulation, think how it's going to work, pay attention in the moment you are adding sugar and cocoa powder, and to keep it fluid. So your melanger is going to work very, very nice, very easy. Besides that, Cocoa Town machinery is very friendly use. It's easy to know, to get to know them. As Kimberly say, connect with your machinery. Put all your senses when it's working. And you can early notice if something is going wrong. So a dense paste will affect the rolling of the milestones, and it's going to make a heat effect. That's one thing that happens. If they are very thick, if the chocolate is very thick, your stones are going to suffer and to get this heat effect. Yes. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about beans, specifically cocoa beans specifically. And the question is, how does cocoa butter content of the beans differ from fermented beans versus lavado beans, roasted beans versus raw beans in regards to the effect on the grinding process? And I will let you guys, somebody want to speak to that first, or maybe Reyna, since your mic is open, you want to go ahead and speak to that question?
Yes, thank you. You know, I made chocolate with lavado beans. Sometimes people tell me, "Oh, lavado beans doesn't have a cocoa butter." I say, "Well, why not?" I have not noticed any difference between lavado, fermented, or beneficiado beans. Really, it's all about the formulation. If you are making a 85% cocoa nibs chocolate, it's the same. You don't need cocoa butter. But making a 50 and 50, it's going to be the same lavado and fermented. You need cocoa butter. So that's my experience. I need to study more the chemistry of the beans, the lavado beans and the fermented beans to get to know more about the fats in them. But here I can I have no experience. I haven't noticed differences.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Nick,
Yeah.
how about you?
So one of the things for me is beans are like my biggest issue. I think someone in the chat mentioned that what's the biggest issue we have to deal with. Despite the fact that we are a producing country, that doesn't necessarily mean that we produce a lot of beans. And I think Arun might be in the same position himself. Not all beans are created equal. We haven't got hundreds of thousands of people, doing cocoa and making a living from it. And so therefore, where you get your beans is super important, but then you can't import beans in. We're not in the situation of Kimberly or to a lesser extent, Reyna. What I have found is not all beans behave the same. So I'll often find a large number of over fermented beans, and that affects the amount of cocoa butter which is within the beans. I'll find beans which are under fermented, which generally for me, slightly under fermented is definitely better than over fermented. And that also messes with the amount of cocoa butter within them. I tend to find it significantly more viscous, though I do find it has an interesting fruity flavor to the actual finished cocoa, but it really puts your machine under a lot of pressure. Then how much cocoa butter do you add? How much is that going to be changing the finished chocolate to it, etc., etc. Unlike parts of Latin America, we don't have a tradition of using different types of fermentation with our beans, but in general, it's just bad fermentation. So we're constantly having to try and work on getting people to ferment beans in a way which is going to work better for chocolate, as opposed to how they would ferment for cocoa balls, which are like, rough ground chocolate, which you then grate and put into hot milk or hot water to make into a drink. So we're basically having to work within a tradition which doesn't use the beans. People always talk about how we're in countries which produce beans, but we don't produce chocolate. We're having to reinvent the wheel constantly to get people to understand how they treat the beans. And that's our biggest issue in regards to that. I can't answer more in regards to that individual question, but it's just something which I thought, I'd share with the group.
Thank you, Nick. Kimberly?
So very much like Reyna, I haven't seen much of a difference. I work with fermented beans and I also roast my beans. I know that through like books and research that in the roasting process, you do lose some cocoa butter that ends up in the shell, but I haven't really seen this play a major effect on our process.
Thank you. Arun, do you have some experience you can share? Unmute your mic, Arun.
Like Nick says, I've not worked with lavado beans before, and we only have the fermented beans which are in use. What I have done with regards to, it's for the initial 2 years of my venture so far has been more about infusions and all that part. So now we are venturing into, like what Nick was saying previously, we needed to build a brand and also have some business to get into the side of experimentation and creating new products to the market. So now what we have started doing is we are identifying new farmers and new origins. So India being a big country, we are getting beans from, like a single farm, which is non-existent in the map of, a cocoa manufacturer, big companies. And we are trying to work with those farmers to develop a bean with which we can do some experiments as we go forward. So this is something which I have taken up as a venture going ahead, where we are identifying farmers from really, a single farm in somewhere in the middle of nowhere or something like that. And that's what we are trying to work towards right now. But someday I would love to work with. I've been reading a lot about it. I worked with a Mexican chocolate maker before about and heard a lot about the levado beans and how what difference it makes, and it is becoming a trend in India too, with a lot of bean to bar makers trying it out, and probably down the line I would too. So, but right now I don't have much experience with it.
Thank you. All right, so this is a sort of a three-part question, or three questions, and you can answer them sort of together. We want to know about the normal learning curve for making chocolate. We want to hear a little bit about maybe a specific or a few trials and errors in your experience, and then to speak just a little bit about how over time you've developed your recipes. I know that's a loaded dialogue, but just a little bit about the learning curve in making chocolate, maybe share a trial and error or share something about that as part of your journey. Nick, could you start us off on that?
I have so much to learn, right? But for me, I look at Kimberly and Reyna with huge amounts of jealousy, because you have a long history with cacao, you have expertise with cacao, you have people who have done huge amounts of academic research on cacao, something which we all love. Here in Jamaica, we don't have that, or we had that and we lost it. You know, our production, what Ghana loses probably in a day of production is what we have as a year's production as a whole in terms of cocoa beans. So we're working from a different level. And so that's had to change my view on the process. So my response is going to be different. I started as a chocolate maker. I'm passionate about making chocolate, but I'm also aware that my next level of changing the process is how I work with the farmers for us to have an industry, for us to be able to connect, like Arun was saying, with these farmers, because we're at a level where we're building. You know, everybody else is building out of something which is already established. Ours is almost like nascent. It's almost an embryo trying to pop out. Do you know what I mean? And that's where we're trying to get to. So for me, I love the bit of the process which I love at the moment is finding, like Arun says, a small farmer, working alongside with them, learning with them about how to process their beans, taking their beans, working with those beans. And it's a very long process, as Arun knows. You know, not only do you have to work with them to get the beans off the tree, you're working with them to get the fermentation right, you're working with them to get the drying right, you're leaving the beans to age, to outgas, and then you're finally making a chocolate, then you have to wait again. You know, this process is like a year-long process. It's like the longest development phase for a chocolate ever. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But for me at the moment, that's where my passion lies in regards to how we're developing it, because it's bigger than just me. It has an impact on so many other people. That's my take on your question, sorry.
Thank you, Nick. So Kimberly, we're talking about learning curve, trial and error, recipe development. And Nick talked a little bit about shifting your passion or your passion. What can you share with us?
What I can share is for us, we made our first batch of chocolate in 2016. The idea came to us in 2014. And one thing I'll say is I'm still learning. I'm not done learning. I'm a forever learner. And when it comes to the chocolate industry, I don't think you're ever done learning. But even so, just to my story is different. Someone else's story could be different. But before we actually made that first batch of chocolate, you know, we read books, we took classes, we, you know, moved back here to Ghana to learn the context of the environment, the context of cocoa and the history of cocoa here. And so that's still something we continue to do on a daily basis. And so in terms of, once again, I mentioned this before, I'm a firm believer in documentation. It helps, it definitely helps. That's probably one of the best pieces of advice I've got. And something that Nick said earlier is also tasting other people's products. That's key. Tasting other people's products who you admire. That's very key. And understanding the different flavors that you would want to get. And also, even not only just the process of, you know, having your beans and turning them into chocolate, but very much like Nick said, is a lot of a key part of the work into chocolate making happens at the farm level. And for us, yes, Ghana is known for its quality and its standards in cocoa, and that's a great thing. But there's also, I don't want to say a downside, but that's for lack of a better word. There's a downside to that in the sense that when things are so standard, it gives the lack of opportunity to experiment with different ways of fermenting. So there have been different chocolate makers who I have encountered who have played around with the fermentation, and you've gotten such interesting flavors, just as, for example, if the farmer rotates the beans twice or once in the period of fermentation, you can get a completely different tasting chocolate each time. And that's something we're hoping, you know, as we develop even our own farm and as we try and work with farmers, is to introduce that, because yes, the standard is great, but it also creates sort of like a lack of uniqueness, and that's actually very key in terms of chocolate making. That's also my take. I hope I answered it as best.
Yes, thank you. Arun, you want to talk about the learning curve in chocolate? Anything about trial and error, your
Yes.
recipe development?
So with regards to what I focused on, it was more from the start. I wanted to have a clear direction where we are heading. So two factors which I worked on from the start. It's been 2 years since we made our first batch of chocolate, and the first batch was on the line. It was clearly health and nostalgia was the focus. So we wanted to also make it more like people so chocolate has always been more about sugar in India, and also it's something which is not Indian. We have a lot of Indian sweets which we are able to associate easily with. So I wanted to bring something where we are able to associate ourselves with, and you could imagine yourself having a something more, a common man can actually associate with. So that's how we initiated the brand, and that's how we started our venture. So that's the recipe development before I think of a new product. So something away from what can be available in the market. And then that's something which is about the recipe development part. And could you just tell me the other side of your question?
Yeah, just to speak about, to let people know, maybe we have some people that are on the call that are either looking to get in the business or are new, you know, maybe new in the business. Just to speak a little bit about the learning curve.
Yeah. So first
and
thing
then any
about
kind of trial and error that you faced.
Yeah. So the first
Sorry.
thing about first thing about the whole industry is we have to learn a lot from our peers. Like there is someone every day coming up with something new around the world, and and this is a very small family. You could say the bean to bar industry is a small family. So this webinar with Nick, Reyna, and Kimberly is actually such a welcome thing for me, because I've learned a lot in the last 1 hour with their experience, which I would probably go back and try in my own facility. So it's always important to actually understand, and the market is new around the world, so we should probably encourage more in this industry, so that the industry grows as such. Because right now many people, it's very difficult for us to the most important fact is everyone can make amazing chocolates as long as there are good beans and good machinery. It's about reaching the client and reaching to your customers and making them understand why this is different from a commercial chocolate and what is special about it, especially in a country which does not which has not been exposed to such a product. It's very important. That's something which has been the learning curve for me, and I've worked towards making my client the base understand what we are actually trying to do when we say a bean to bar chocolate or a craft chocolate. So that would be my take on the the industry so far.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Reyna, would you like to share your experience or anything about the learning curve in chocolate making, some trial and error that you think might be important for people to hear?
Okay, yes, thank you. But first of all, Nick, Mexico as a cocoa producer is not now as it used to be. We are losing a lot of plantations because there is a big drama. The new generations, the young people, is not interested in growing cacao. And why happened that? Because they went to the university, they want to work in offices and things like that. And besides that, cocoa beans are very poor paid. You get very poor paid with producing cocoa beans. So right now we are trying to save the plantations that are now here, trying to save the old kind of cocoas they used to be the legendary cocoas in Mexico. And we are trying to motivate the producer to have more trees and to take care of the plantation, paying more for the product. Okay, so talking about the learning curve for making chocolate, I think it depends on the time you give to practice your formulations. It depends on how much you love to make chocolate. If you really love to make chocolate, yeah, you want to take courses, you want to take trainings, but you can learn by yourself. You can go into the internet, that it's very good, we have it, to get to know experiences, to get to read books, and it's all about that. If you are making chocolate because you love it, because you like it, then you are going to put all your feelings in that, in learning, in practicing, in everything. About the recipes, how do I develop a recipe? It depends on the kind of beans I get. I need to smell, to touch them, to open, to figure it out what will be a very good formulation for that kind of cocoa beans. I need to try different roastings, low roasting, medium, high, and try and taste them before I put my batch. So even in the kind of sugar, I must put in cane sugar, coconut sugar, honey, powdered honey, and also it depends what my people around here, my local market loves. Here in Comalcalco, nobody make milk chocolate. I'm making milk chocolate and I'm selling a lot of milk chocolate. 2 weeks ago, I went to Mexico City to the chocolate and cacao salon. And all my 90s, 85s, 80%, 75, 70, I sold them all and milk chocolate. But the amount of darks were bigger than the milk chocolates. So in Mexico City, people love dark chocolates. Here in my place they love milk chocolates. So I'm making 50% and 60% with milk. And I need to have all the time in stock those chocolates because people love them. So I developed the recipes regarding to the what my clients ask. So they have in here in this place sweet tea, I think. And yes, I have made a lot of mistakes making chocolate, using wet sugars, tempering with high humidity. And once I made a big batch with cocoa beans over fermented. And besides that, they took a lot of time getting dry, the cocoa beans. So they smelled rare, but even though I made chocolate with those beans. So all my batch went to the trash, really. So those are the kind of mistakes I have in the past. So now I pay a lot of attention on my beans. I pay for good beans, and everything is going very easy, very soft. That's it, Teresa. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. All right, we have just one more question from me, and then we'll move on to some of the questions from our visitors, our participants. But before we do that, I just want to thank everybody and say what an honor it is to I'm not a chocolate maker, but a bean to bar chocolate lover and connoisseur. So it's kind of like, you know, if you're a rock fan and you're getting to meet rock stars, I feel like I'm, you know, kind of in the presence of rock stars. So I really appreciate all of your time and sharing your expertise. So the last question that we have for you is, what would be the one takeaway for those that are at home, the chocolate makers or the aspiring chocolate makers, the one takeaway that you would think would be most valuable for them to leave our time today with? And I'll start with Reyna. Your mic is already open. So Reyna, would you share that one pearl of wisdom or that one gift that you want to leave our panel with today?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to say, get to know your machinery. Love your machinery. They are doing your job. They are helping you express the personality of the cocoa beans. Be attentive to any change or in sound or vibration of the machinery. Do not leave them unattended. Do not overload your melangers. Clean them. Take care of them. Like in Mexico, the electricity goes down and out. So there are some boxes that regulate the in of the electricity. Have one of those. So they are going to protect your machinery, and they have breakers, but it's never extra what you do for your machinery. Have fun making chocolate. Infuse love in the chocolate you are making. Respect your producers. Don't be picky paying what they ask. Pay more if you feel you can. Get to know your clients and get to know your competitors in your area. Make the difference in quality. The presentation of your bars is very important because they attract to your site. And please, and for the most, I'm asking you to make a positive impact for the cocoa producers. They really need it. The chocolate industry is very, very rich. Against that, the cocoa producers, most of them are very poor. So pay attention on that. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, you all. Thanks, Sandra, for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. Bye.
Thank you, Reyna. Thank you. We're happy to have you with us. Arun, you want to share that takeaway that you want everyone to leave with?
Yes. The first thing I would say is to understand the market, your market, and who your customers are and what they expect from this, and educate your customers, and then go back to your farmers, educate them, and also look out for those farmers who need help in the cocoa plantations. There are so many farmers who actually have the facility and do cocoa as a part of their farming, and a lot of farmers who depend on this and do not have access to sell it at a better cost. So try to reach out to more farmers than what meets your eye alone, and also try to, and then with regards to the finished product and your equipments, make sure you have all safety factors put in before you start working in your factory. Make sure your team is safe, which is a very important part also. It's very important to give them a good have a good connect to work along. It's all about sharing of knowledge in this, and try to gain as much as knowledge from around the world, and that's how you can go about bean to bar, because there's not many experts yet, and it's just going to be a lot of time, and the learning curve is going to take time, some time. And thank you, Cocoa Town. Thank you, Teresa. And it was great talking to you guys. And it was great sharing knowledge with you all, and also understanding a lot about what Nick does, Kimberly and Reyna, all of you do. And hope this webinar is of some help to everyone who has attended it. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Arun. Kimberly, would you like to speak about that one takeaway that you'd like to leave us with?
Yes, so I would say know your purpose. Know your purpose, start with what you have, and don't be afraid of failure. Knowing your purpose is know why you're doing this. And why I say that is, if you think that, oh, chocolate making is cool, it's trendy, it's a lot of hard work. It's challenging. There'll be days where you want to give up, days that you'll ask yourself, why did I decide to do this? And if you don't have a purpose behind what you're trying to do, if you don't have a motive, then you'll easily find yourself just throwing in the towel and saying, that's it. I think we can all attest, just based upon everything that the different panelists have said, that it is challenging, and we all face different challenges where we are. So know your purpose. The next thing is start with what you have. I personally started very small. I didn't start by going in, having state-of-the-art equipment. I started small, and as I learned and as I grew, then I was able to, purchase more things. So I started with what I have, and don't be afraid of failure and of mistakes. To make a lot of good chocolate, you're going to first have to make a lot of bad chocolate sometimes. And sometimes, like Arun said, your failures can actually turn out to be your successes, in that you made a mistake and actually it turned out to be a great tasting chocolate. And always be a learner. I've learned so much from the other panelists just discussing with them and being here today. And I continue to learn from other people in the field. I continue to read books, to do research, to see what other people in the industry are doing. Never think that you have arrived and you have learned all that there is to chocolate. I don't think that's possible. And I think as we all continue on throughout, you know, our businesses, we're going to keep on learning.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Nick, last but not least.
Yes. I think everybody's said all of the key points, which I love. I agree and echo all of them. Like Kimberly, I think, you know, sometimes we can get into an arms race for equipment. I need to have, like, you know, 5-roll refiners, and I need to have a automatic, you know, continuous tempering machine, and I need to. You don't. Take it back, scale it back. Get equipment which you need, and only upgrade when your equipment is almost at capacity. You know, don't put yourself into debt. You know, don't put yourself into debt before you've even got a working business. This is a business. You know, at the end of the day, it's got to feed you, and it's got to hopefully feed other people. Don't put yourself in a position where all of that can be in jeopardy. And I think, going way back, I really believe in the bean. I believe that ultimately the bean says it all. And if you get great beans going in, you'll get great chocolate going out. And so my advice is, really work with your farmers to be able to get those quality beans. That will make a difference in the chocolate which you're able to produce. And going back to what Kimberly said, working on that process alongside them, you know, bring them along that same journey which you're going in, and it will reap rewards for all of you. You know, I think all of us in developing chocolate nations, let's put it like that, face one big problem. And the big problem which we have is access to market. But we have so much responsibility on our shoulders. I think all of us have mentioned about what we want to do and how important it is for our nations as a whole. Maybe that's too much responsibility, maybe it's too much weight, but we know that that's the impact which cocoa can have. And I remember years ago going to Northwest Chocolate Festival, and I said, I really wanted people to work with our beans. And I realized that's actually our USP. You know, that's our unique selling point. We have access to incredible farms, incredible cocoa, and that's what's going to take us into the next market. We just have to get the logistics side of it right, and we're away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nick. All right, so we've wrapped up our questions, and I would like to invite Mrs. Balu, who has been moderating the chat, and I think may have some questions from those of us that are joining us. Welcome back, Mrs. Balu. Do you want to take the floor now and ask some of those questions?
Yes, thank you, Teresa. Yeah, one thing is, before I do that, I look at my next point at the end, especially in the pandemic situation all over the world right now. People are looking for the market. How do they reach? Because they don't have extra budget for marketing. That's the one reason we at Cocoa Town have this share the mic feature kind of thing, we call it. We try to showcase at least 2 of our customers every week. So whoever is listening, if you have a small business or a big business, doesn't matter. If you have a chocolate business, if you want the world to know that you are, what you do, what your products, send us your picture, your story, and also what is the special chocolate that you're making. We will be glad to share it on our social media. We don't have that many, like say, we cannot reach thousands of people, millions of people, but we can reach thousands of our followers. Even if you're not selling, maybe there is another chocolate maker, they're interested in bartering. So you send your chocolate to them, they send their chocolate to you, and you sell each other's chocolate in your country. So that's the collaboration we want to bring it to the chocolate community, because the peer collaboration and helping each other goes a long way, especially in this current situation. So please feel free to contact us if you need any kind of help. So now we can go back to the questions. Yeah, the first question is they want to know how do you clean the melanger and what temperature? And then the next question is, what temperature do you, maybe let's go one at a time because they are not related questions. So how do you clean the melanger? But I just want to let you know, when I'm moderating, I'm giving only the questions that's related to the today's webinar, because there are some questions that are not related to today's webinar. So I'm not going to ask. Maybe we will have some webinars in the future about that. So we will just, since it's about machine also as part of this, so I'm going to ask people how they clean their melangers. So anybody can take it and answer.
I just use hot water in my melanger. In the 12 SLTA, it's just take the bowl off, hot water, no soap, just really get into the crevices to get to the inside of the actual grinder stones, and then use microfiber to make sure it's all dry, and then leave it out covered with the top to dry naturally. Someone said there's difficulty cleaning the stones in between the screws and the tubes, hard to dry it. Yeah, microfiber is almost like what people use to, it's a very fine cloth, okay, with microfibers attached to it, so it can kind of get into those hard to reach places. I use like wire brushes to clean inside the tubes of the SLTA as a prime example, and that's pretty straightforward. The issue which I have, but I know that Andal and the team have dealt with that, is when you use the bigger machines like the 65A to E, if you're working on your own, being able to remove those huge stones is very difficult, but you can use a special lifter to be able to get to those. Again, you want to be using hot water to be able to get into all of those difficult to reach places, and also that you're not adding soap into the actual grinder stones. You want to avoid that.
Thank you. And then the other one is, they're asking, what is the main obstacle when you started the chocolate business? So I don't know, that's very broad, and I don't think that's relevant to this. If you don't want to answer, or if anybody wants to answer, I will leave it to you.
Okay. I would like to say that the big industry, they have a lot of money, they have commercials on TV, radio, Facebook, everywhere. So we are not able to pay expensive advertisements. So people is used to eat chocolate that's not chocolate. So we are working, we are working, trying, we want to make the people understand that bean to bar or small producers don't use chemistry in their chocolate, in making chocolate. So it's real chocolate. It's not with additives or chemistry with flavor as chocolate. Tastes like chocolate, but it's not chocolate. That's what I feel. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else wants to add?
I'll just echo on you can make, on what Reyna said, you can make great chocolate, but also finding people to actually buy the chocolate, that's also another story, especially being in such a saturated industry. And so sometimes you have to get a little creative. Right now, one thing that has worked awesome for us has been social media. A lot of our first clients were through Facebook and Instagram. And if you focus on quality, then, and you're consistent, that's very key. Having a consistent product and having a product that's quality. And when it gets to people, they will actually spread the word about you. And that's one of the key things that happened for us at the beginning, was word of mouth. So make sure you're developing a good product, make sure you're paying attention to quality, and make sure that your product is consistent. consistent in terms of quality. Yeah, and use social media. It's a great tool.
Yeah. Then the next question is, somebody's asked, have you used stevia, the sugar substitute? Okay, so none of you have used stevia.
I've experimented with stevia, and one thing is know your clientele and also know what taste people are looking for. Stevia isn't for everyone. Stevia has a very particular taste. I personally don't like the taste of stevia. It gives you sort of like a Diet Coke taste. So if you're working with stevia, because I don't like the taste with stevia, I didn't pursue it. But you can do chocolate with stevia, but once again, it's going to give you a very unique taste, and it's not necessarily pleasant for everybody. And it does have a very distinct, sharp taste out of a lot of the non-sugar sweeteners.
Okay, the next question is the minimum, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, and I have used stevia as well. And stevia keeps its a strong flavor, herbal, strong flavor. So if you don't have very fermented beans, you feel first the strong flavor of stevia than the flavor of beans. So it's hard to make chocolate with stevia. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. The next question is, somebody is asking, is there any minimum level of fat you need in your chocolate to work with?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Is a question in regards to within the bean itself, or added fat to it?
They did not mention. I think they're asking added fat, because everybody knows the cocoa beans has 45 to 55% cocoa butter. I think they are mentioning about the additional cocoa butter.
I mean, I put no more than 5% into my bars. I'm really just looking for consistent mouthfeel when I'm adding in that. I just want the chocolate to melt out at the time it should take, and I want to be able to mold it. I don't know if anybody else has tried this, but when you work with like really high viscosity chocolate, when you try and temper it, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare if you're using a continuous tempering machine. It's a nightmare if you're doing it by hand. You're literally just there watching it turn to concrete as you're actually trying to hand mold it in. You don't want that. So if you add around about 5% in, that's going to make pretty much any unworkable chocolate workable.
Okay. The next question is, do you think it's necessary to dry the jaggery sugar?
Can I go ahead? Yeah, so I think it is necessary to dry jaggery as much as possible, because even this little bit of moisture actually causes issues with the grinding, and also the shelf life is reduced when there is existing moisture in the jaggery also. So it's as much as you can make it refined, and in the sense, like the particle size is small, and it's also dry, it works best. It's just from my experience.
Okay, and then how about the cocoa butter that you're adding? Do you choose natural cocoa butter or deodorized cocoa butter?
Me personally, I really like using natural cocoa butter, and I go around trying to find the nicest natural cocoa butter I can find. You have to remember each location, each farm, each bean genetic will produce a different flavor cocoa butter, and adding that can give my chocolate a different flavor. You know, so even though I'm working primarily with different regions of Jamaica, that's my thing, the terroir of different parishes, different geographical areas of the island. What I do like is mixing and matching a little bit of that cocoa butter, even at 1%, can add a very different other additional flavor note into the chocolate, which the cocoa on its own may not have. So that's my take on how to do it. For me personally, I actually find that using deodorized cocoa butter takes away everything. I mean, it's just like adding soap to chocolate. You know, there's nothing to it. It's the worst thing in chocolate ever. I don't know why it was ever developed, because it's just like useless as far as I'm concerned, personally.
Okay, anyone else to add it, or can I go to the next one? Okay, the next one is somebody's asking, they are using 35% of cocoa butter in addition to what is in the chocolate. Is that right?
How much?
35% cocoa butter they're adding.
That would be a very, I'm not sure how, no disrespect to the person, I'm not sure how nice that would taste, because that just sounds like a whole heap of cocoa butter. Unless you're, that's a lot of cocoa butter. I don't know what anybody else would think.
Kimberly, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, that sounds like a lot to me as well. And one thing, how you would know is I once put too much cocoa butter in chocolate, and it moves from chocolate is supposed to have a smooth mouthfeel, unless you're purposely making the sort of grainy chocolate. But it's supposed to have a smooth mouthfeel. And when you add too much cocoa butter, it begins to become not smooth and more slimy. So if you taste it and it's slimy, and you give other people to taste it and they're like, I can taste the cocoa butter, then you know that's too much. But just hearing 35, that sounds like too much.
And just adding to Kimberly's point, cocoa butter is expensive. You're significantly cutting into your profit margin if you're doing this as a business by using so much cocoa butter. You know, everything's about margins, everything is about money. And cocoa butter is a expensive line item. So bear that in mind as well. If you can't make it with that much, yeah, you need to drop your cocoa butter, because it's going to financially ruin you.
See, this is question, I have also heard from, especially from Ghana, when I went and met with the chocolate makers there. They are using 35% cocoa butter. I don't know, maybe somewhere in the internet it says to use 35% cocoa butter. So I'm trying to tell them that it's too much cocoa butter, but as an equipment manufacturer, I go tell them, they don't, I don't know, they may not trust me, because that's why when you guys who have experience, maybe you can tell them that they don't, like you said, Nick, it's on ROI, the return on investment. So you have to know how much you can sell it for, and by adding the additional cocoa butter, which is a lot more expensive than the cocoa beans, maybe we should have a blog article. You guys, all of you can write, and then we can post it on the website for people to know. I think that will make a lot of financial sense for a lot of people in different countries. And since this is a new industry, we need a good information from the practical side, who have made it as a business, not as doing an experiments or something like that. So since you do it as a business, and chocolate making is a business where you need to have a profit to sustain, I think that's a good advice, that you don't need that much cocoa butter.
And dear Andal, talking of that as a business, I'm going to have to say goodbye to everybody, because I have to pop off the call to finish off some other business which I have to do. I just want to say how much I appreciated being on this. My final parting note is, it's a business, line item everything. If you want to make this, if you want to do the social impact, if you want the social justice, if you want to still feel passionate about it years from now, you have to treat it like a business from pretty much day one. How much is your sugar? How much is your electricity? How much is your time? How much is your time? It's one thing which we often forget. We need to bear all of those in mind if we want to make a success and give our chocolate industry the push which it ultimately needs. So I've really enjoyed it. I hope everybody doesn't mind me popping off, but it's a pleasure to meet you all. Take care.
Well, thank you so much, Nick, for joining us and sharing your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Nick, one quick question. Somebody said, since you were talking about the machines, somebody is asking, they want to start the bean to bar business in Philippines. What is the most two important equipment that he has to buy first? You can just answer the two machines and then you can leave. Sorry.
A Cocoa Town grinder. You see what I did there, Andal? Okay. And a winnower. I'm sorry, winnowing is by far the most nightmarish part of the process. I know that Gabriella asked about roasting. Roast the beans in your oven. When it smells like brownies, everybody, you're there, right? Take them off a little bit early. That part is easy. But winnowing is literally the most difficult, annoying, back-breaking, time-consuming, frustrating element of chocolate making. And you need to be able to refine your beans down to that under 20 microns where you don't taste it. And make sure you get good beans. So 3 things. Guys, a pleasure. I'm gone. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you for your time. Okay. The next question is, okay, are there recipes to make chocolate instead of trying to do trials and fail in order to skip the error step? And using molasses should be powder or liquid?
Molasses, when you use molasses, must be powder, very dry. Yeah.
And adding to it, and there's no specific recipe, and it's all trial and error. There is a basic recipe for it, yes, but after that it's all trial and error, and every bean, every facility acts differently, and you will have to go through a lot of trials to be able to fix on a product and finalize a product which you're putting out to a market. It's unlike baking and other things where you have specific recipes. You will have to create your own recipe and formula in this.
The next one is related to the beans. They're asking, when you see the bean, how do you know it's a good bean? From smelling it, or how do you select the beans when you start making chocolate?
Yes, you need to have a reference, maybe in pictures, what is a good bean. A good fermented bean and a good lavado bean. If you are not able to have the beans before. And then when you get them, you need to smell them, to touch them, you need to open. If the bean is fermented, the smell is acid. And it's hard. When a bean is wet, it's not hard, it's soft. So there are several signs. Even if you don't know, you haven't had before beans, there are several signs that tell you that the bean is good. Broken beans are not good, and things like that. It's not difficult to figure it out when a bean is good or not.
Anyone else want to add to that? Or?
Yeah, I think what Reyna said was spot on. Just use your 5 senses. You don't want to use beans that are too flat. You want to make sure that the beans aren't moldy. You want to check and make sure that the beans aren't infested with pests. So definitely use all 5 senses when assessing your beans.
Okay. Then somebody is asking, Um, how long do you leave the machine on? 18 hours to do the grinding or more? The grinding time. How much time does it take for grinding?
Until you get 18 to 20 microns. That's it. You have to measure microns, once you don't feel texture in your tongue, the chocolate is ready. It can take more than 18 hours, more than 24, almost 40 hours. It depends.
Okay, and this question is for you, Reyna. They're asking, when you use the honey, do you dry the honey or do you, how do you use it?
Powder honey, lyophilized honey. They freeze the honey and they take the water out and they powder the honey.
Someone is asking about the winnower, and they're asking what's the average recovery of cocoa nibs by weight after winnowing.
You lost, like, from a kilo, you lost like 200 grams.
Okay. That's okay. I think there's one thing I want to clarify is when people say how much you lose, actually it depends on the weight of the skin, because sometimes if the beans are clean, like Reyna said, it's only 200 grams, but sometimes if there are some other things attached to the skin or something, you might lose more. The way you have to calculate is how much skin you get with the nibs and how much nibs you get with the skin. That's how you say if you are getting a good result or not. And do you have any other way of measuring it?
I get very clean beans, very clean beans. I don't lose any bean from the ones I buy. So that's why maybe I'm losing just the peels.
Anyone else? Okay. Oh, okay. Somebody is asking, this is a good, question. I think as a practical use, you can answer. They're saying when you need to grind overnight, do you turn them off at night or you continue grinding? Because, my machine manufacturers say, do not use the machine without attending to it. So how do you use it in a practical sense?
Well, one must be attentive to when the machine is working. So I don't like to leave my machine working without me around there. At night, I turn it off and let the chocolate to rest. And it's good for the chocolate to have some periods of resting time. You get better chocolate when you do that. It gets like mixed all the flavors and things, and it's better. It's good to let the machine rest and your chocolate in as well, let it rest.
Anyone else? Kimberly or Arun?
We usually run the mission overnight. We have somebody for supervision and we run it overnight. One of us make sure, me or my team make sure we don't stop the process.
But you're monitoring it.
Yeah, continuously monitoring through the night.
Okay.
it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work, and it's a lot of strain, but we tend to do that.
Okay, and somebody is asking, they're making the chocolate using cocoa powder instead of beans. What's your take on it?
I don't think you're going to get very good tasting chocolate. I've never tried that. The cocoa powder is a result from the nibs. So you definitely, if you're going to make chocolate, you need to make it using the nibs to get a good tasting product.
Okay, somebody said they lose some of the flavors in the grinder. Have you had the experience? And do you give importance to the flavor or the texture?
Well, you lose acidity. The melanger is all at the same time is conching your chocolate. The effect of conching your chocolate is moving the chocolate to lose acidity.
Okay, the next question somebody is asking, like when you're leaving overnight, do you leave the, how do you restart the process?
Well, I do that. When I turn it off, I cover the melanger in order to not to lose temperature. It's warm, you cover it with towels, and the next morning you turn it on. That's it. Just take care not to harden the liquor inside.
Okay, I think it's 12 o'clock and we want to respect everybody's time. So I think if any other questions, please feel free to email us. We will get the answer from the panelist and send it to you. And, we had advertised that also Jose from Ecuador will be on the panel today. Unfortunately, he could not make it for his because of some personal, issue. But he has a lot of, good information to give. So we will have his webinar in the future. Again, we will have more detailed processes. So we are going to have more webinars. Our next webinar in the series is called Cocoa is More Than Chocolate. So not just making chocolate, how you can, especially in the origin countries, how you can make a business from other parts of the cocoa tree. So we look forward to seeing you all there and have a good day. Teresa, you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to thank all the panelists and everyone that showed up to hear their experience with us today. And just want to share couple of my takeaways. One of my takeaways is everything that you shared. I'm not a chocolate maker, but there are a lot of life lessons in the journey of chocolate making. So I was making mental notes of things that I know I can apply in my life, like don't give up and mistakes are a good thing. And then the other thing I'm so always overwhelmed by in this industry, being the bar industry, is the heart and the willingness of the people in this business to share openly and freely what they've learned to empower success for what you would think would be your competitor. Everyone is so willing to share their knowledge and experience. So that is always so inspiring to me. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, one just final note. We are going to send you a feedback survey. So please complete it because we want to give better information or better written topics. So if you have any suggestion for the topics that you would like to learn, please let us know. And thank you all for your time again. Good day.